I overheard my son plotting to steal my $200 million fortune. He thought I was too senile to stop him. So I pretended to lose my mind and built the perfect trap. They say old age makes you soft, that the years dull your edge and leave you vulnerable to those who circle like vultures, waiting for their inheritance. My son Richard believed that. He believed it so thoroughly that he grew careless, and that carelessness would be his undoing. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I'm 78 years old. For 60 years, I built an empire from nothing, from the ashes of my father's failed hardware store to a network of commercial properties worth over $200 million. I survived the recession of the 80s, the market crash of 2008, and more backstabbing business partners than I care to remember. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I discovered my own son was plotting to steal everything I'd built. This is the story of how an old man, dismissed as senile and past his prime, orchestrated the most devastating counterattack of his life. Even the judge who presided over the case said he'd never seen such tactical brilliance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, on that Tuesday morning when the first thread began to unravel. The first suspicion. It was a Tuesday in March, unseasonably cold for California. I remember because my arthritis was acting up, making my hands stiff as I tried to button my shirt. My housekeeper, Maria, had the day off, so I was alone in the sprawling house in Palo Alto, the same house where Richard had grown up, where his mother Ellen had died 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer. I'd gone downstairs to make coffee when I noticed Richard's car in the driveway. That was odd. Richard lived in San Francisco, nearly an hour away, and he rarely visited without calling first. He claimed to be busy with his venture capital firm, though I'd long suspected that firm was more about spending my money than making any. I heard voices coming from my study, Richard's voice and another man's, unfamiliar and sharp with professional efficiency. The study door was closed, which immediately raised my hackles. That was my private sanctuary, where I kept decades of business records, legal documents, and personal files. "We need to move faster," the stranger was saying. "At his age, with the medication he's on, the cognitive decline argument will be easy to establish." I know, Richard replied, impatient. "But we need documented proof. The doctor's reports, witness statements, examples of erratic behavior. Your lawyer friend can help with that. And you said the housekeeper is cooperative? For the right price, yes. Maria's been documenting everything, missed appointments, forgotten conversations, confusion about dates. It's building a nice pattern." My blood turned to ice. I stood in the hallway, my coffee forgotten, straining to hear every word. "What about the will?" the stranger asked. "That's the beauty of it. Once I get conservatorship, I control everything. The will becomes irrelevant. I can liquidate assets, restructure holdings, whatever I need. By the time the old man dies, if he even realizes what's happening, there'll be nothing left to fight over. It'll all be legally mine." Richard laughed. My son laughed at the thought of destroying me. I don't remember walking back to the kitchen. I don't remember sitting down. The next thing I knew, I was staring at my hands, these old, weathered hands that had built skyscrapers and signed billion-dollar deals, and I was shaking with a rage so pure it felt like fire in my veins. For a long moment, I sat there deciding. I could confront him. I could throw him out of the house and cut him off immediately. But that would only accelerate his plans. He'd file for conservatorship faster, bring his false evidence to court, and I'd be fighting with my back against the wall. No. If Richard wanted to play chess, I'd show him how a master plays the game. I heard them leaving, their voices fading as they walked to the front door. I stayed in the kitchen until Richard's car pulled away. Then I went to my study. Everything looked normal, but I knew better now. I knew every file, Every document in this room was a potential weapon in my son's hands. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 60 years of lessons learned in business warfare. The first rule: never let your enemy know you're onto them. The second rule: gather intelligence. The third rule: strike when they least expect it, and strike with overwhelming force. By morning, I had the beginnings of a plan. The investigation begins. The next day, I called my oldest friend, Marcus Chen. Marcus and I had started out together, two young men with nothing but ambition and a willingness to outwork everyone else. While I'd gone into real estate, Marcus had become a private investigator, specializing in corporate espionage and fraud. He retired 5 years ago, but I knew he still had connections. "Tommy," he said when he answered, using the nickname only he was allowed. "Been a while. What's wrong? How do you know something's wrong?" "Because you only call me Tommy when you're in trouble or when you need someone investigated." "Which is it?" "Both," I said. "It's Richard." There was a long silence. "Your son?" "I need to know everything, Marcus. Who he's working with, what his plans are, how deep this goes. Can you help me? I'll be there this afternoon." Marcus arrived at 3 o'clock, looking every bit his 76 years, but with eyes still sharp as razors. I told him everything I'd overheard. He listened without interrupting, taking notes in that meticulous way of his. "You're sure it was about conservatorship?" he asked when I finished. "Positive. He wants to declare me incompetent, take control of everything." Marcus nodded slowly. "It's more common than you think. Adult children taking advantage of aging parents, especially wealthy ones. But Richard," he shook his head, "I always thought he was better than that." "So did I." "All right. I'll need access to your financial records, your medical files, anything Richard might use against you. And I'll need you to act completely normal. Can you do that?" "Marcus, I've sat across from men who wanted to ruin me and smiled while negotiating deals. I can handle my son." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus worked his magic. He had people follow Richard, dig into his business dealings, check his phone records and emails. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. Richard's venture capital firm was a facade, a money pit that had burned through $15 million of his trust fund in 3 years. He owed money to private lenders, the kind who don't accept late payments. His business partner, the man I'd heard in my study, was a lawyer named Gerald Ashford, who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for aggressive conservatorship cases. But the real knife in my back was Maria, my housekeeper of 12 years, the woman who'd held my hand at Ellen's funeral, who I'd helped send her daughter to college, had been collecting evidence against me for 6 months. She'd been photographing my calendar, noting every time I forgot an appointment or mixed up a date. She'd been recording our conversations, editing them to make me sound confused and rambling. Richard had promised her $50,000 and a job with his foundation, once he had control of my assets. "There's more," Marcus said, spreading photos across my desk. "Richard's been meeting with your business managers, your accountants, even some of your property managers. He's been telling them you're declining mentally, that he'll be taking over soon. Some of them are positioning themselves for the transition." I studied the photos, Richard glad-handing, schmoozing, playing the concerned son preparing to take over his father's failing empire. In one photo, he was shaking hands with David Morrison, my CFO of 20 years. David was smiling. "How many?" I asked quietly. "Of your inner circle? At least 5 that we can confirm. There might be more." I felt something inside me harden, like steel cooling in a forge. These were people I'd trusted, people I'd made wealthy. And they were ready to throw me aside the moment they thought I was weak. "What about legal?" I asked. If he files for conservatorship, what are my chances? Marcus grimaced. With the evidence he's manufacturing? With Maria's testimony and a doctor willing to diagnose cognitive decline? 50-50 at best. These cases are designed to protect vulnerable seniors, but they can be weaponized. Judges err on the side of caution. So I need to prove I'm not vulnerable. More than that, you need to prove Richard is the threat, not your salvation. I smiled then, a cold smile that made Marcus lean back slightly. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Building the counterattack. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you tremendous freedom. When people think you're declining, they don't notice when you're actually planning. They see what they expect to see, an old man moving slowly, forgetting things, needing help. So I gave them what they expected. I started missing appointments deliberately. I'd show up to a business meeting an hour late, looking confused about the time. I'd forget people's names, call my grandson by his father's name, leave rooms wondering what I'd come in for. Around Maria, I was especially befuddled, asking her the same questions multiple times, seeming disoriented about what day it was. She documented everything, just as Richard wanted. What she didn't know was that Marcus had installed cameras throughout the house. Every conversation, every smug look, every time she pocketed something small to add to her evidence collection, it was all recorded. But the real work was happening behind the scenes. I hired a new lawyer, Catherine Park, through a shell company that couldn't be traced back to me. Catherine was a specialist in elder abuse and fiduciary duty, and she was brilliant. Together, we began building a case that would turn Richard's strategy inside out. First, I underwent a complete neurological and psychological evaluation at Stanford Medical Center, paying cash and using a different name. The results were clear. I was sharp as ever. No dementia, no cognitive decline, no signs of vulnerability except normal age-related changes. We locked those results in a safe deposit box, ready to produce them when needed. Second, I started transferring assets, carefully legally, in ways that would look like normal estate planning. I created new trusts, moved properties into LLCs with different management structures, set up charitable foundations. None of it would stop Richard from filing for conservatorship, but it would make his end goal much more complicated. Third, and most importantly, I gathered evidence. Marcus's team traced Richard's debt, not just the business losses, but personal debt. Gambling debt. Richard had a problem I'd never known about, one he'd hidden well. He owed money to some very unpleasant people, and those debts were coming due. The conservatorship wasn't just about greed, it was about survival. We documented every meeting Richard had with my staff, every conversation where he discussed taking over. We recorded Gerald Ashford coaching him on how to present evidence of my decline. We traced the payments he'd promised to Maria and others. And then I found the trump card. It was Marcus who discovered it, buried in property records from 25 years ago. Richard, at age 24, had been arrested for embezzlement from his first employer. I'd made that arrest go away, paid restitution, called in favors to keep it off his record. I'd done it because he was my son, because everyone deserves a second chance. He'd never mentioned it again. He'd never thanked me. And now he was trying to steal everything I had. The arrest records were sealed, but Marcus knew people. We got copies, legal copies, obtained through proper channels. They showed a pattern of dishonesty, of taking what wasn't his. Combined with his current financial desperation, it painted a damning picture. By mid-May, 2 months after I'd overheard that conversation, I was ready. But I didn't strike yet. Because Richard had taught me something valuable in all this: patience. He was waiting for the perfect moment to file his conservatorship petition, when he'd have maximum evidence and I'd look most vulnerable. I decided to give him that moment. The trap springs shut. In early June, I called a family meeting at the house. Richard, his wife Jennifer, their 2 kids, and my daughter Sarah from New York. Sarah and I had always been close, unlike my relationship with Richard. She was a neurosurgeon, brilliant and compassionate, and she had no idea what her brother was planning. "I need to talk to all of you about the future," I said, playing my part perfectly. "I'm not getting any younger, and there are things we need to discuss." Richard's eyes lit up. This was what he'd been waiting for, me acknowledging my age, opening the door for him to step in. The meeting was everything he could have hoped for. I rambled a bit, lost my train of thought, seemed confused about some financial details. Maria brought in coffee, and I called her by the wrong name. Richard exchanged glances with Jennifer, barely suppressing his satisfaction. "Dad," he said, all concern and sympathy, "have you thought about maybe getting some help? Someone to manage things, take some of the burden off you." "Help?" I said, looking puzzled. "I have Maria. I mean with the business, with decisions." "Maybe someone younger, someone who could." "You?" I said, and there was just enough edge in my voice to make it unclear if I was being sarcastic or genuinely confused. "I think what Richard means," Jennifer interjected smoothly, "is that we're all worried about you. You seem different lately." Sarah frowned. "Different how?" "Dad seems fine to me." "You haven't been here," Richard said quickly. "Sarah, you visit maybe twice a year. You don't see the day-to-day decline. The forgotten appointments, the confusion, the—" "What decline?" Sarah's voice was sharp, her doctor's instincts kicking in. "Dad, have you been having problems?" I waved my hand vaguely. "Oh, you know, the usual. Can't remember where I put my keys. Forget what day it is sometimes." "It's just age, sweetie." "It's more than that," Richard insisted. "Dad, you missed a meeting with the board last week. You showed up on Tuesday when it was scheduled for Wednesday." "Did I?" I looked genuinely distressed. "I don't remember that." And there it was, Richard's opening. Over the next hour, he built his case, listing every incident of my decline, every missed appointment, every confusion. He made it sound like I was one step from a nursing home. Jennifer backed him up, adding observations from her visits. Even the kids looked worried. Sarah tried to defend me, but Richard had answers for everything. He'd been building this narrative for months, and it sounded convincing even to me. Finally, Richard played his trump card. "Dad, I've been talking to some lawyers about conservatorship. Just as a precaution, you understand. To protect you, to make sure everything is managed properly." "Conservatorship?" Sarah's voice could have cut glass. "Richard, that's serious. That's taking away Dad's legal rights. It's for his own protection. It's for your bank account," Sarah snapped. "Don't think I don't know about your failed businesses, Richard. This isn't about me. The hell it isn't." I let them argue, playing the confused old man who didn't quite understand what was happening. Finally, I raised my hand for quiet. "If you think it's best, Richard," I said softly, "then I trust you." The room went silent. Sarah stared at me in disbelief. Richard's face showed triumph, quickly masked by concern. "Are you sure, Dad?" he asked, already pulling out his phone, probably to call Gerald Ashford. "I'm tired," I said. "So tired. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help." It was the performance of my life, and Richard bought every word. He filed the conservatorship petition the next morning. The revelation. The court hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In that time, Richard moved fast, consolidating his evidence, lining up witnesses. Maria was prepared to testify about my decline. Gerald Ashford filed briefs full of medical terminology and legal precedents. Richard even found a doctor willing to state, without examining me, that I showed clear signs of age-related cognitive impairment. Sarah hired a lawyer to fight the conservatorship, but Richard had the momentum. His evidence looked damning on paper. The day of the hearing arrived, July 15th, a Tuesday. The courtroom was in downtown San Jose, a modern building of glass and steel. Judge Patricia Morrison presiding, no relation to my soon-to-be former CFO. Richard arrived with Gerald Ashford and a team of associates, all looking confident and professional. Sarah sat beside me, gripping my hand, looking more worried than I'd ever seen her. Maria was there, dressed conservatively, ready to testify. What Richard didn't know was that Marcus was there too, sitting in the back row with 3 large briefcases. Catherine Park was there, not as my attorney of record but as an interested observer. And David Morrison, my CFO, was there, but not for the reason Richard thought. The judge called the court to order. This is a petition for conservatorship of Thomas Whitmore, filed by his son Richard Whitmore. Mr. Ashford, present your case. Gerald Ashford stood, smooth and practiced. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of an elderly man who can no longer manage his affairs. We have documented evidence of cognitive decline, missed appointments, confused behavior, and concerning financial decisions. Mr. Whitmore himself has acknowledged his difficulties. He presented his evidence methodically, Maria's documentation, the doctor's statement, testimony from business associates about my erratic behavior. He painted a picture of a man slipping into dementia in need of protection. Sarah's lawyer, Michael Chin, Marcus's nephew, not coincidentally, countered as best he could, but the evidence looked bad. I played my part, sitting quietly, looking tired and confused. Then came the witnesses. Maria testified first, describing months of declined behavior. He asks me the same questions over and over, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He forgets what day it is, forgets appointments. I'm worried about him. He needs someone to take care of him. And Richard Whitmore has been involved in his father's care? Ashford asked. Oh yes, very involved. Such a devoted son, checking on his father regularly. Richard looked at me with what was probably meant to be compassion, but looked more like anticipation. Then David Morrison took the stand. I've worked with Mr. Whitmore for 20 years, he said. In the last 6 months, I've noticed significant changes. Confusion about financial matters, difficulty understanding complex reports, missed meetings. As his CFO, I'm concerned about his ability to make sound business decisions. Sarah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Judge Morrison looked at me with something like pity. Mr. Whitmore, do you understand these proceedings? I looked up, seeming confused. Yes, Your Honor. My son thinks I need help. And do you agree with that assessment? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. I looked at Sarah, then at Richard. Finally, I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, may I speak? Of course. I stood up slowly, using my cane for support. Every eye in the courtroom was on me. Richard leaned forward slightly, confident this was just an old man's last dignity before defeat. Your Honor, I said, and my voice suddenly changed. The confusion was gone, replaced by the steel that had built an empire. I need to tell you about a conspiracy. Richard's face went white. For the last 3 months, I continued, I've been playing a role. The confused old man, the declining patriarch. I've missed appointments deliberately. I've acted confused deliberately. I've given my son exactly the evidence he needed to file this petition. Dad, what are you? Richard started, but Judge Morrison silenced him with a look. Because 3 months ago, I said, I overheard my son plotting to steal my fortune through false claims of incompetence, and I decided to let him reveal his true colors before I stopped him. Catherine Park stood. Your Honor, I'm Catherine Park, and I represent Mr. Whitmore. With the court's permission, we'd like to present our evidence. This is highly irregular, Ashford protested. So is filing a fraudulent conservatorship petition, Judge Morrison said dryly. I'll allow it. This should be interesting. And then Marcus and Catherine unleashed everything. They showed the video of Richard in my study, discussing the plot with Gerald Ashford. They showed recordings of Maria manufacturing evidence, taking payments from Richard. They showed David Morrison and others positioning themselves for Richard's takeover, not out of concern for me, but for their own interests. They showed Richard's gambling debts, his financial desperation, the pattern of dishonesty going back 25 years to that sealed arrest record. They showed my medical evaluation from Stanford, sharp, competent, showing no signs of cognitive decline. They showed financial records proving every confused decision I'd made was actually brilliant estate planning that would have protected my assets from Richard's scheme. The evidence went on for 2 hours. With each revelation, Richard sank lower in his chair. Gerald Ashford's professional confidence crumbled. Maria looked like she wanted to disappear. David Morrison actually tried to leave the courtroom before Judge Morrison ordered him to sit back down. Finally, Catherine played the master stroke. She called me to testify. Mr. Whitmore, she said, can you explain your actions over the past 3 months? I stood at the witness stand, and I told him everything. How I'd overheard the plot. How I'd investigated. How I deliberately created evidence of decline while simultaneously protecting my assets and gathering proof of the conspiracy. I spent 60 years building something from nothing, I said. I survived recessions, market crashes, and backstabbing business partners. Did my son really think I couldn't survive him? Why didn't you simply confront him? Judge Morrison asked. Because I needed to know how deep the betrayal went, I said. I needed to know who I could trust. My housekeeper, my CFO, my business associates. I needed to see who would stand by me and who would throw me to the wolves the moment they thought I was weak. I looked directly at Richard. I needed my son to show me who he really was. Judge Morrison looked at Richard with something between disgust and fascination. Mr. Whitmore, the younger, do you have anything to say? Richard stood slowly. For a moment, I thought he might try to bluster through, to claim misunderstanding. But he looked at the evidence spread across the tables, at the video of his own words, and I saw something break in him. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? Sarah's voice rang out from the gallery. Richard didn't answer. He just sat back down, his lawyer's hand on his shoulder. Judge Morrison took a deep breath. In 30 years on the bench, I've seen a lot of conservatorship cases. Most are legitimate attempts to protect vulnerable seniors. Some are money grabs dressed up as concern. But this... She shook her head. This is the most calculated, cynical, and frankly evil attempt to steal from a parent I've ever witnessed. She looked at me with something like respect. And Mr. Whitmore, your counter-strategy was brilliant. Morally questionable perhaps, but legally brilliant. I learned from the best opponents. I said, the petition for conservatorship is denied, Judge Morrison declared. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for possible prosecution. Mr. Ashford, you'll be hearing from the state bar. Ms. Rodriguez, she looked at Maria, you'll be hearing from Immigration Services about visa fraud. And Mr. Morrison and the others who participated in this scheme, I suggest you retain criminal counsel. She turned to Richard. Mr. Richard Whitmore, you're not charged with anything today, but I expect that to change. You plotted to steal from your father, suborned perjury, and conspired to commit fraud. You're a disgrace to your family name." She banged her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes fell exactly as Judge Morrison predicted. Gerald Ashford was disbarred after an investigation revealed this wasn't his first fraudulent conservatorship case. He'd been running a scheme for years, targeting wealthy seniors and taking percentages of conserved estates. My case broke it wide open. Maria was deported after ICE discovered she'd been working under a false Social Security number for years. I could have prevented it. I had that much influence, but I didn't. Some betrayals are unforgivable. David Morrison and 3 other executives were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. They took plea deals, testifying against Richard in exchange for probation and restitution. David's testimony was particularly damning. Richard had promised him a vice presidency and profit sharing once he controlled my assets. Richard himself faced multiple charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, attempted theft by false pretenses. His lawyers tried to make a deal, but the DA's office, under pressure from an elderly advocacy group that had seized on the case, refused to budge. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming, and Richard's defense, that he genuinely believed I was declining and was trying to help, was shredded by Catherine Park in cross-examination. "If you genuinely believed your father was incompetent," she asked, "why did you need to pay the housekeeper to manufacture evidence? Why did you need to coach witnesses? Why did you plot in secret rather than arrange a proper medical evaluation?" Richard had no good answers. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Richard was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, though he'd likely serve 3 with good behavior. His assets, what little remained after his debts and legal fees, were seized to pay restitution. Sarah visited me the day after the sentencing. We sat on the back patio of the house, looking out at the garden Ellen had loved. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about that. How did I feel? Victorious? Vindicated? Sad? Empty, I said finally. I spent 3 months destroying my son. I was brilliant at it, tactical, ruthless. And now he's in prison, his life is ruined, and I'm sitting here alone wondering what I did wrong as a father. You gave him everything, Sarah said firmly. Money, opportunity, second chances. You did nothing wrong, Dad. Richard made his choices. I know. But a part of me keeps thinking, if I'd been a better father, if I'd spent more time with him when he was young, if I'd been less focused on building the business. Stop, Sarah said. I had the same father you gave Richard. I turned out fine. This isn't on you. Maybe she was right. Or maybe we were both right. Maybe I'd been so busy building an empire that I'd forgotten to build a relationship with my son. Maybe Richard's greed was his own failing, or maybe I'd taught him that money was the only thing that mattered. I didn't know. I still don't know. What I did know was that I'd won. I'd protected everything I'd built. I'd exposed the betrayers and sent them packing. I'd proven that an old man could still fight, could still win. But victory felt hollow. The final move. A month after Richard's sentencing, I made my last move in this long game. I called Sarah to the house and had Catherine Park meet us there. I'd made a decision. I'm dissolving the business, I told him. Sarah stared at me. What? I'm liquidating everything. The properties, the holdings, all of it. It'll take a year or 2, but when it's done, there'll be nothing left but cash. Dad, why? You spent 60 years building this. And I'm tired, Sarah. I'm 78 years old. I've spent the last 3 months in war with my own son. I've seen people I trusted betray me for money. I'm done. But what will you do? I smiled. I'm going to give it all away. Over the next 18 months, I did exactly that. I sold every property, closed every business deal, liquidated every asset. The empire I'd built for 6 decades was dismantled piece by piece. The money, all $200 million of it, went to foundations and charities. Medical research, in Ellen's name. Scholarships for underprivileged students. Programs for elderly protection and abuse prevention. A legal fund for seniors fighting fraudulent conservatorship. I kept enough to live comfortably for my remaining years, and I set up trusts for Sarah and my grandchildren. But the empire itself? Gone. Richard sent me a letter from prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. Dad, I know you'll probably never forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable, not just the plot, but the years before that when I took your generosity for granted and wasted every opportunity you gave me. I've had a lot of time to think in here. About who I became and why. I was always in your shadow, always compared to you. Everything I did, you'd done better. Every success, I had felt small next to your achievements. I think somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to earn my place and started feeling entitled to it. That's not an excuse. It's an explanation. What you did, the way you outsmarted me, anticipated every move, built a perfect trap, it was remarkable. Even the prosecutor said it was the most sophisticated counterintelligence operation she'd ever seen in a civilian case. You proved you were still the smartest man in the room. I hope you find peace, Dad. I hope you can forgive me someday, though I don't expect it. I hope you use the rest of your years better than I used mine. Your son, Richard. I read that letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and tried to decide how I felt. I never wrote back. Epilogue, 5 years later. I'm 83 now. Richard got out of prison last year, moved to Oregon, and opened a small accounting practice. He calls on my birthday and Christmas. We talk for a few minutes, polite and distant, like strangers who once knew each other. Sarah visits often, and my grandchildren, both hers and Richard's, come to stay during summers. I teach them chess and tell them stories about building the business, though I edit out the darker parts. The house is quieter now. I have a new housekeeper, a woman named Janet who's honest and kind. Marcus comes by every week for chess. We're both getting older, moving slower, but our minds are still sharp. People still talk about the case. It became something of a legend in legal circles. The grandfather who pretended to be senile to catch his son red-handed. Law schools use it as a case study in elder abuse, evidence gathering, and strategic thinking. Someone even wrote a book about it, though they changed the names. Judge Morrison retired last year. She sent me a letter saying my case was one of the most memorable of her career. She also said it had prompted reforms in how conservatorship petitions are investigated, making it harder for people like Richard to exploit the system. I suppose that's something. Maybe some good came from all of it. But late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I still wonder, was I right to do what I did? I destroyed my son to save my empire, then destroyed my empire anyway. What was the point? Maybe the point was the principle. Maybe it was about refusing to be a victim, about fighting back when someone underestimated me. Maybe it was about proving that old age doesn't mean helplessness. Or maybe I'm just a bitter old man who was better at business than at being a father. I don't know. I'll probably never know. What I do know is this. When someone underestimates you, when they think age has made you vulnerable and weak, when they circle like vultures waiting for you to fall, that's when you show them what you're really made of. Richard thought I was an easy mark, a senile old man ready to be swindled. He learned that the hard way. So did everyone else who betrayed me. I'm Thomas Whitmore. I built an empire from nothing, survived every challenge business threw at me, and when my own son tried to take it all away, I beat him at his own game so thoroughly that even the judge was impressed. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But the truth is, revenge doesn't taste like anything. It doesn't fill the empty spaces or repair what's broken. It just proves you can still fight, even when everyone thinks you're too old to matter. And sometimes, that has to be enough. The case of Whitmore versus Whitmore is still cited in legal proceedings across California. Thomas Whitmore lived to be 89 years old, surrounded by his daughter and grandchildren. Richard Whitmore rebuilt his life slowly, though he never fully recovered from the scandal. He never inherited a penny from his father. In his will, Thomas left Richard a single item, a chess set, with a note that read, "You never learned to think more than one move ahead. I hope prison taught you better." Whether it did or not, no one can say.